Hello everybody, this is Mr. Laubach. Thanks for joining me. In this video, we are going to jump into the First Great Awakening and focus on two of its most influential leaders, George Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards. You can check out one of my other videos about the Great Awakening more in its entirety, but in here we're going to focus a lot on George Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards. So first, what was the Great Awakening? Religion was fading in the colonies. The First Great Awakening happened in the 1730s and the 1740s across the American colonies. It was this huge religious revival that shook up traditional church life. Instead of focusing on formal rituals or complicated theology, preachers emphasized personal faith, emotional experiences, and a direct connect with God. This movement challenged established churches. It also inspired the growth of new denominations or religions, like the Baptists, Methodists, and Presbyterians, and encouraged ordinary people to think for themselves about faith. It also signaled the end of more widespread Puritanism. In the long run, it laid some of the groundwork of equality and independence that would later feed into the American Revolution. It also should be noted that the First Great Awakening was the first event that was experienced throughout the colonies. Also, it's called the First Great Awakening because there was a Second Great Awakening that would take place in the 1800s. Now let's talk about the stars of the movement. George Whitefield. Some people call him George Whitefield, but I'm going to call him George Whitefield. He was an Anglican preacher from England who became a kind of a celebrity in the colonies. He was what was called an itinerant preacher. He didn't stay in one area, but instead traveled from town to town, bringing his message wherever people would listen. Sometimes he preached in churches, but often he held massive outdoor camp meetings where thousands would gather. His booming voice and dramatic delivery could electrify an audience of 10, 20, or even 30,000 people at once. Whitefield's message centered on the idea of a new birth, meaning a powerful, emotional conversion experience. He crossed class lines, appealed to all kinds of audience, and spread revivalist energy up and down the colonies. In a way, he helped unify the colonies through a shared religious experience. So Whitefield was very charismatic and often preached outdoors at these camp meetings. Benjamin Franklin was a big fan of Whitefield's. On the other hand, we have Jonathan Edwards, a Congregationalist minister from Massachusetts. Edwards was a brilliant theologian, a deep thinker, but also an emotional preacher when it came to matters of the soul. His famous sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, is probably the most well-known sermon in American history. In it, he painted the vivid image of God's wrath, but also stressed that salvation was possible if people turned to God with heartfelt faith. Edwards didn't have Whitefield's flair for outdoor theatrics, but his words could move an entire congregation to tears. So in summary, Whitefield was a charismatic itinerant preacher who drew crowds to camp meetings across the colonies, while Edwards was the intellectual firebrand whose sermons pierced deeply into people's consciousness. Together, they sparked the rise of new denominations, gave ordinary people a stronger voice in religion, and helped shape the democratic spirit that would later define America. Now, of course, these two weren't the only preachers during the First Great Awakening, but they are the two most significant in the APUSH curriculum. And quotes from them or related to them are often seen in the big APUSH test. So thanks for watching. I hope you learned a little bit more about the Great Awakening. Have a great rest of the day.